verses are John 10, verses 14 to 16. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep knows me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of the sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd.
Well, thank you so much, Jeff, for sharing our scripture passage with us today. Welcome. If you're just now clicking in to join us, my name is Ryan Phipps. This is Church in Bethesda. Let's get into our lesson from the scriptures today. That is such a beautiful passage, one of my favorites. I am the good shepherd, Jesus says. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there will be one flock and one shepherd. We started a series last Sunday called Field Notes for Seekers, where we are looking at some of the questions about God, about faith, about life and religion that every generation asks. Last week, we started off by addressing some questions about the existence of God. And today we are looking at questions surrounding this religion that is called Christianity. Questions like, is it the only way? Is it one of many ways that is a little bit closer to the truth than all the other ways? Is it a false belief system altogether? And our questions about this topic today, probably more than any other topic we'll address here in this series, have the potential to divide us more than unite us if we're not careful. And I want to make sure that I just name that here at the beginning today so that we can watch out for that if it begins to arise within us. I also want to acknowledge as I begin today that anytime I or anyone else attempts to answer questions about God from the scriptures, that we are bringing our own bias to that topic, to those answers, even if we try our best not to. I struggle with this from this platform every single Sunday. I don't ever intend for my biases to be a part of it, but I know that in some way they are. This is the tension that all teachers hold within themselves. Perhaps the easiest way that I've come to understand this tension in myself, in my work, is using the way that my eyes work as a metaphor. I went to an eye doctor many, many years ago when I had to get glasses, and they checked everything, and they found out that I am 22%, yes, 22% colorblind in both of my eyes. And what that means for me, practically speaking, is that when colors get closer together on the spectrum, like say a light green or a light gray or a light blue, I am unable to distinguish those colors from one another unless they are sitting right next to each other. This is because of my own eyes and the way that they have formed. This will never change for me. It will be with me for my entire life. And so it means that if I want to know what a color really is, I have to work a little harder at that. I have to accept as fact that when I see something light gray that I think is light gray, it might in truth actually be light blue or light green. And so it is helpful to me to take the extra time to find a swatch of green or blue to hold up beside the gray to make sure that I'm seeing the color that's really there. But it's most helpful to me to just ask someone else in my life who can see the colors rightly that I can't if I am in fact seeing the real color. What is my point? Number one, my point is that we need to acknowledge that we all have biases. And number two, we need to acknowledge that we need one another to see reality more clearly. And it is my prayer today that I am seeing this topic from the vantage point of the many rather than just from my own vantage point. That being said, there might be things that you hear today that set off all kinds of alarms in you. And if and when that happens, I want to ask you to follow it immediately in your mind with something like, that's my bias and Ryan's bias clashing with one another. That is not a cue that we need to depart and divide, but rather an opportunity for us to come together so that we might see all of the colors more clearly. Here at Church in Bethesda, the gold standard is that differences are never deficits. In fact, we look at differences as gifts, as opportunities for learning and growth. We need one another's eyes to see God, the world, and one another more clearly. And whatever you see this morning, you are welcome here to add your vision to our vision so that we might see more clearly together. Everybody good? Raise your hand if that makes sense. Why did you raise your hand? I can't even see you. We're on the other side of a camera. Just wanted to see if it would work. Okay, so for today, questions about Christianity. We have been asking in this series for you to write down one thing to remember each week in your field notes booklet. Today's question is Christianity the only way? And here's what I want you to write down. As a header, week 2, Q, semicolon, is Christianity the only way? Question mark. One more line down, A, semicolon, maybe. I am a Christian. I call myself a Christian. If someone asks me what I believe, I say that I am a Christian. And yet it might shock you to think that that is how I would answer that question this morning. To me, the problem is with the question itself. Globally speaking, this morning, there are approximately 45,000 different Christian denominations on the planet Earth. Did you know that? 45,000. And so when someone asks me, is Christianity the only way? The only rational response for me is to respond with another question saying, well, what do you mean by Christianity? Because there are 45,000 different versions of it at work in the world today. Each of these denominations would answer that question a little bit differently. If they didn't, they wouldn't be denominations. And with all that I have learned and experienced in my own life, having worked professionally in 3 different denominations over the last 20 some years, the only commonality I've ever been able to come to an understanding of in all of this is answering that second question by a Christian, what I mean by a Christian, what I mean by Christianity, is someone who chooses, to the best of their ability, to live a life embodying the life and the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. Again, a Christian is someone who chooses, to the best of their ability, to live a life embodying the life and the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. This is, at this point in my own life, the only way I can see it that promotes unity rather than division, and in turn makes for a better world. The minute that we ask more of it, in my opinion, we start getting off into the weeds, and there's great potential for ugliness. So is Christianity the only way? Well, maybe. What about the other religions in the world? The interesting thing to me in my studies about all of the other faiths is that when we break them down to their rudiments, they each find their root in a person who lived in such and such a way that others want to emulate that way of living for the making of a better world. To me, Christianity doesn't own that. Christianity is but one reflection of that occurred in a time and a place where there were no airplanes or internet or FedEx or Amazon or postal service. Nations and cultures and traditions that never met one another, never spoke, never corresponded, somehow, some way, were graced with a sage or a prophet or a thinker or a messenger who, on all the high points at least, ended up teaching very much the same things that Jesus did. Sure, they differ on a lot of the specifics because of culture and tradition and the questions specific to that culture that people are trying to answer. But they are all aiming at the same better world, the same goodness that all human beings have a birthright to. Let me give you some examples from just a few of the world's major religious scriptures. Buddhism teaches us in their writings, hurt not others with that which pains yourself. Christianity, all things whatsoever you would that men do unto you, do ye even so to them, for this is the law and the prophets. Confucianism, the writings of Confucius, the Analects. Is there any one maxim which ought to be acted upon throughout one's whole life? Surely the maxim of loving kindness is such. Do not unto others what you would not they should do unto you. Judaism, the Talmud. What is hurtful to yourself, do not do to your fellow man. That is the whole of the Torah, and the remainder is but commentary. Hinduism, the Mahabharata. This is the sum of duty. Do not to others which if done to thee would cause thee pain. Islam, no one of you is a believer until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself. And finally, Taoism. Regard your neighbor's gain as your own gain, and regard your neighbor's loss as your own loss. All of these different streams empty into the same ocean. And this is what I believe Jesus is foreseeing in the world when he says the words, I am the good shepherd. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. I have other sheep that are not in this barn. They live in another barn. But they also hear this voice. In spite of all the barns, with all of the sheep, there is only one flock and one shepherd. That is so beautiful to me. And if taken to heart and acted upon, this can end wars. This can end poverty. This can reform political systems and governments. This can fix the tax system. This can level the playing field and bring healing to a world that is crying out for it, hour by hour, day by day. Simply, if we acknowledge that God, that Godness, that goodness is at work in other places, in other barns, in other pastures than those that we are familiar with. Is Christianity the only right way? Maybe. If Christianity calls to you to be the very best version of human being, a person of service and compassion and self-sacrifice and unconditional love, then for you, yes, it can be. But if Christianity to you is just a list of commandments that are enforced by threats, that sounds really unhealthy to me. And I want you to see Jesus, his life and his teachings in a different light. And you are welcome here and loved here, not as a person on some lower plane of understanding, but as an equal, as a fellow traveler, one who is, like all of us are, groping for the God that is not far from each one of us, as we looked at last week. Well, what about heaven and hell? What about the cross? What about the resurrection? What about substitutionary atonement? What about all those things? We'll get there. Hang on. But for today, Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. Let those words tug on you. Let them call to you as an invitation, not to a label, but to a lifestyle. Because it really matters very little what you call yourself. What matters is what you are becoming. As we move into a time of reflection now, and we allow this all just to bang around in our brains, I want to invite you to think on why you believe the things that you deeply believe. What are they really rooted in? Are they rooted in feelings of safety and security? Are they rooted in the need to have something that is comprehensive and complete so that you can answer any question that comes across the table of your life? Are they rooted in wanting to be right so that you might expose those who are wrong? Are they rooted in wanting to be a better person, a more open person, a more loving person? Whatever your reasons for belief this morning, I'd like us to pause now in stillness and in silence to comprehend those things. If you would like to receive the Eucharist with us from wherever you're watching, you might not have wine and unleavened bread. That's totally okay. Whatever you have is sufficient. You can also gather the elements to receive communion with us at this time. But let's think on these things as we get quiet and still for a moment and allow the God of all that we see, hear, and feel to work on us inside. Amen.